Now, they have no king, don't they? Or they had no king, because God was going to be their king. But this is frustrating for them, because they keep messing up and getting drug into slavery and having to pray to God. And he eventually, not right away, but he sends somebody, a judge, to save them, and they pull them out of slavery. And then they do this again and again. And we see that eventually God sends them a judge named Samuel, and the people say, Samuel, we want a king, just like everybody else has a king. And Samuel says, no, you don't. But they said, yes, we do. And God says, yeah, give them a king. They anoint Saul the king of Israel. And Saul starts out very strong, but then he begins to waver and be self-serving and make some terrible decisions. And so God says, you know what? I've lost faith in you. You're being replaced. I got another guy over here I'm working on. But you're done. And Saul says, oh, I'm not done. I like being king. And that doesn't work out so well for him. So we begin chapter 16 with God speaking to the prophet Samuel, saying, how long will you mourn for Saul, since I rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I'm sending you out to Bethlehem. I have chosen one of Jesse's sons to be king. So Samuel arrives in Bethlehem, and he walks through Jesse's sons, and the most unlikely looking one is the one that God instructs him to pour oil on, and he does that, and he pours oil on him, and that is a way of symbolizing to people that he is anointed, he is special, he is set aside, and it's a way actually that the Holy Spirit comes into David and begins to bless him. So David then becomes confident enough to go out and attack Goliath. He does this. Saul pays attention, and then Saul asks him to become part of his inner circle, part of his military circle. David does that, and he has a lot of success in his military endeavors. And if you've read the book, you hear the stories told about him and the songs sung to him, and he's very well thought of. And then Saul gets caught in this respect-resent cycle with David. He really respects and appreciates what David's doing for his kingdom, but then he hates the guy. You saw that in the movie here. Eventually, Saul tries to kill David, and David gets the message that, oh yeah, maybe I shouldn't hang around here. So he heads out in the desert with a small army of his own, pursued by thousands of Saul's army men. And it's only by God's grace that David avoids getting caught and getting killed by him. But this is where the story takes an interesting turn. So Saul pursuing David with 3,000 men, and while searching for them, Saul finds himself in a cave. Well, he wanders into this cave, and David is already in the cave, probably hidden in the back shadows, didn't know Saul was coming in there. And Saul probably takes a nap, falls asleep, becomes unaware of David's presence. And David sneaks up on him, and he cuts a corner off of his cloak. And he cuts a corner off his cloak because he's demonstrating to Saul that he was there and he could have killed him, but he didn't. And he didn't want to kill him. So it's kind of a remarkable thing we read next when we read it in 1 Samuel. David's conscience bothered him because he had cut off the edge of Saul's robe. So he said to his men, far be it for me because of the Lord that I should do this thing to my Lord, to God's anointed. David was feeling very guilty about how he was angry and he was able to attack and he was disrespecting the king that God had given him. So Saul is God's anointed. He's his chosen one. David's disrespectful. David is really guilty. And then we see David humble himself before Saul. As Saul's leaving the cave, David arose and went out into the cave, we read, and he called after Saul, saying, my Lord, my King, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is God's anointed. And then he prohibits his men from attacking Saul, who is really probably very vulnerable at this point. Now I want you to bring that whole ancient scenario of all these pious, godly people into today's world and look at what we have today. I want you to imagine a politician, a leader, who is very, very confrontational about his opposition. Maybe even has threatened to injure the other guy. A leader in our country who's threatening his competition with personal injury. What is the response of the guy who's being attacked to that politician? It's huge. He attacks back probably viciously. There are lawsuits, there are blogs written, there are Twitter storms, there are press conferences. It's just unacceptable. The guy being attacked does not respond with a sense of respect for this politician that's coming after him. That is crazy. So the politics and the power that we are used to, that we know, that we've been conditioned to see and to expect, are very confrontational, are very disrespectful, are very combative. I mean, look at the headlines in our newspapers every day. But just to put this in some context, this isn't anything new. You go back to the Revolution and you read people like Thomas Paine and some of the other writers of our Revolution. And Paine said, "It is a duty of every patriot to protect his country from the government." So there was this people-government battle already going on back then. You go to the Civil War, if you've ever been to the Lincoln Museum in Springfield, Illinois, it's a great museum. They have this whole room, and it's covered in newspaper headlines for the Civil War. And I think of Abraham Lincoln as this kind of holy guy, this great, pious, wonderful man that everybody loved. Well, people hated the guy. These newspaper headlines, they look like today's newspaper headlines. Vicious personal attacks on his character. So we have a long history, even going back to the founding of our country, where we have had hostility between people and our government. That is our kind of normal. Now, is that okay? Is that the way it's supposed to be? Is that the way we as Christians need and are called to relate to our government? Because it seems like David is doing something a little bit different. Can we learn something from him? Well, I think so. There are a couple different ways to look at how we relate to the government. The Christians in this country have not all of us, but many of them, some of our Christian leaders, have been very adamant at pushing this position that ultimately the church is in charge and the government works underneath the church. Maybe you're part of this. Maybe you believe this as well. There's God, and then there's the government that operates underneath God, underneath the church, actually. And the church had better pay attention to what they're saying, and better obey what the values of the church are, or they're going to find themselves in the targets of the church and be subject to some bitter attack. Because ultimately the church is correct. God is correct, and all power comes from God. Now, that may be the position of Christians, but it drives non-Christian people crazy. And then there's the other position, and that is that the people elect the government, and the government has ultimate authority. The government says what is what, and the church can operate in that, but the church better not step out of line too much with what the government says. So if the government says this is good, the people have voted that this is good, and the church is saying, no, we don't agree on marriage or immigration or gender issues or whatever the thing is, that the government can say, "The church, you are out of line. You are no longer important. In fact, we're going to attack you for that." That's another way to see it. Now that makes Christians crazy. But there's a third way here. There's another way we can see how the government and the people work together. And this is what Luther had spent a lot of time talking about. Luther talks about how the world is made out of two kingdoms. The kingdom of what he calls the sword, the government, the power, and the kingdom of the church. And they both work together equally because they are both owned by God, they are both run by God, and they both bless us and keep us safe and keep us, show us what is good and right, and work together to give us a world that we can work in. The church is about forgiveness, and the church gets really anxious about moral issues and stands up for what it believes is right. But the church never puts on a police uniform, and it never makes laws. The government is in charge of making certain we put the bad people in prison so they don't raise havoc, and that we are driving on the right side of the road. But the government does not say, "Hey, this is good and this is bad," because that's the church's role. So when you have the government doing their job and the church doing their job, it balances out and it kind of works. Luther said, church leaders make poor kings, and kings make poor church leaders. But we're living in a time right now where those two groups, we don't work together always real well. In fact, we kind of want it our way. We want all the power. We want to have, I get caught in that. But that is a foreign way for the people of God to see how the world works. God calls us to a different standard than having all the chips on our side of the table. The fourth commandment says, honor your father and mother. And what does that mean? It means that we are to respect and appreciate and acknowledge the authority of those that have authority. And we may not agree with them, but we're to respect them. Not always my forte, by the way. And Paul says in Romans, let every person be subject to the governing authorities. For there's no authority except from God. And those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. See, it seems like we are seeing that authority is, the structures of this world is something that is given to us by God. And that is a good, healthy thing for us to operate in. But when people are doing stuff that we don't like, when our leaders are doing stuff that we don't like, we barely even often have a language that helps us talk about this, let alone compromise. Our culture is so combative naturally. Do you see that? Are we any different as God's people? But God has given us this gift of government, even when we really mess it up. He's given it to us to care for us and to give us the ability to do His work without being crushed and in chaos. Now, we may love the police officer or hate him. We may hate the way that the county has zoned our neighborhood, or the law the state has passed, or the thing that the government has said. But all of those are agents of the government that God has given us to serve us. And we may not agree with them, and we may debate them. And we probably should, and we need to sometimes. But they are all there to care for us. And we get a glimpse of that in what David does today. Thank God we have a God who has given us these structures that we can function in this world and be healthy and be safe And thank God that when we mess that up and we complain and moan and maybe act a little inappropriately at how angry those people over there in government make us, that we are forgiven for that. And thank God that while we go about His work, that He is giving us structure and a community that lets us do His work and not be caught in the morass of no rules, no structure, and just chaos. It makes playing the game He gives us much more pleasurable, and it makes playing the game He gives us as we do His work a blessing that we get to participate in. Thank God for that blessing. In Jesus' name.